I've been back ordering stuff from China, this time finding someone that was willing to sell me the PlayStation 5's graphics card. Right, so you join me with what is meant to be the PlayStation 5's graphics card ordered from China. Now, there are already a couple of telltale signs that this is from China, such as the scribble that once was here, which is actually saying what this is. Congratulations if you can make that out. And also all the Chinese text here that probably says something, but we don't know what it is. I think it's just a postage label because it says GB on it, so I think that is just post. But this is, for all intents and purposes, according to the listing, this features the AMD BC250 APU, which is a variant of the APU from the PlayStation 5. Now, I believe from what I found out online, this is just a cut-down version of the exact PlayStation 5, and it cost me about £96 to import this to the UK. I have no idea what's in here, I have no idea how it works. I just saw it pop up and I thought, you know what? Given some of the strange things we look at on this channel, is that not just perfect? Because for 96 quid, if this works, this is not just strange, this is remarkably good value. Because that's the power of a PS5. There's no need to talk about console-beating PC builds when you can just use the same hardware for 96 quid. Anyway, let's get this open and see just what's going on inside. I don't know if it comes with any documentation, any tutorials, any paperwork. We are now in. Well, it's packaged well. What have we got? We've got packaging, and I'm assuming that's to mount it in a server. Tape and screws. That's not exactly promising. And here it is, the APU itself. So this is the bit of kit we apparently do need. Big. It is very big. More tape. Here it is. This is the BC250. It is a unit, is probably the best way of describing it. Look at that heat sink. Somewhere under here is the APU of the PlayStation 5, but it does have a few headers on it, and just about make out what they say. So down the bottom here we've got the power button, the clear CMOS battery with no battery in, so we'll have to get one of those out. An 8-pin power plug. These look like special connectors that we don't have, and the rest of it are just I/O headers and fans. So we probably will need a fan on top of this. We could probably just mount one on simply. So this is just weird. This is very odd. But as I said, if this works, it is technically good value. 2 power buttons, but we don't actually know what those buttons do yet. 2 USB 2s, 2 USB 3s, display port, and Ethernet. I think what we do is we get some bits together and we try and turn it on. Let's just go for it. Yeah, let's plug this in. If we get a signal out of it, we try and install Linux first. Linux is the main thing to run on these because you can actually get drivers. I don't believe any drivers do exist on Windows, but who knows, maybe we'll try and bodge something into working on here. We've had a good success rate with it. I didn't think this would actually arrive, and I did not think this would actually be real. Literally, I ordered the PS5 from China, but this time it's actually weirder than just a scam console. We're gonna have to use a big monitor. And then for power, well, the best power supply I own is actually in my computer. It does have a dedicated 8-pin. So this is a 1000 watt Corsair unit in it, which should be more than enough to power things. So my plan is we can just rest this inside the computer. That should be our power provided there. This is of course an amazing setup, just dangling out of another computer. So we should just need a display port cable to get this all connected up. And we're definitely going to be needing fans of some sort. This is really going to be a trial by fire experiment. There is a bit of documentation on these out there, but we're just going to make it up as we go along. If you can just work these out of the box with just plugging it in, we've got a fan we can connect up, give us some idea if it's got any life to it. We're not going to worry too much about connecting it all up properly just yet. I take it this does nothing. We'll get a CMOS battery, so we can just pinch this CMOS battery out of this motherboard bundle we bought a while ago. Our CMOS battery. We might need to turn on the computer to enable the 8-pin power, but this system isn't going to use much power if we just leave it idling, so this should make things easier. So if we turn that on, it also turns on this. This is our indicator light. We have got an M2 slot down. Oh. It works. It works. This is a bodge setup. I don't want it to get too hot, but this is on and this is working. So as long as we just leave the computer running, which is giving the 8-pin power here, which should be enough to power the entire system. You can do this in a better way with just a power supply where you trip the pins to turn it on. 2021 AMD BC250, 16 gigs of memory. It is from the year 2406. This is a beautifully cursed experience going on right here. So the good news is, without reading anything at all online, we've got it working, which is good news for people that just want something simple that will work out of the box, provided you can just do this. Hardware monitor, how hot is it? CPU 46 degrees, fan setting standard mode. I think we mount that on top. Right, we'll try that. We can always add more fans if we need to, but we'll leave it on full speed for now because it's not very hot. So we've got CPU virtualization, network stack disabled, NVMe configuration, SATA configuration. Is there a SATA port on here? I didn't see one. I don't believe there is a SATA port anywhere on here. I think it's M2 only, so I might have one of those lying around. Let's disable quiet boot because we want to actually be able to see what it's doing. One of these might be a power. That's just a light. Next job is to try and get an operating system on here after we do something very crucial, which is install the fan in the best way possible. So we're just going to do this. Oh, this is. I can already tell this is going to be a fantastic video. Cooling has been achieved. Let's get whatever Linux USB stick I got set up and plug that in and see what it does. We may need to add an M2 SSD. I got one, I might have one somewhere. We'll take a little look. I don't really keep any M2s on hand, so this is going to be a funky situation. Okay, so we're going to see if it boots off this real quick, which will be very interesting to see. This is a very janky setup, but this is also a very janky solution. So, step one, will it boot off something? Fans on, everything's a complete mess. Okay, that's come up there. We are just going to see if it will work off a standard SSD, because I've got one here. Then get ourselves to the Linux install screen. I think it's just a copy of Bazite on here, which should be good enough for now. I know there's probably issues with Flatpak and drivers, given what a weird combination this is. So let's go for test this media and see if it'll install. Lots of bugs found. It has detected some sort of graphical something. I mean, it's gone into 1440p. Okay, we're now at the installer. We do have working USB, which is pleasant. Selected. Okay, it does detect the 4TB SSD. We'll let this run through, and then, I mean, it looks like a hideous mess. Let's not joke about this. This is a janky setup, but if you streamlined it with a nice power supply, actually put some coolers mounted on properly, not with just electrical tape, it is dispersing the heat out of itself pretty good right now, to be fair, with just that one cooler on top, but it's not really having to do anything right now. That's a lot of power for £96. This seems like it's going to work best on Linux. What a monumentally crazy thing. PlayStation 5 board, majig, dongle, stick, server, rack, mining thing. BC250. It is getting a little bit toasty. The fans are ramping up a little bit and then quietening down. We are just going to try and mount a little extra fan, and then we're just going to stick that one on top like that. It's a little bit small, but you can just make out that we are now completed. Right, let's try again. For some reason it just rebooted and just stopped. Oh, we are now at the desktop. I'm very excited to see this. This doesn't seem like it should have worked this easily. Okay, we are now at the desktop. I think my biggest takeaway is how easy this has been so far. So, right, if we open up terminal, right, what have we found? AMD BC250. Makes sense. AMD BC250, 12 cores at 3.49 GHz, which will be Zen 2 cores, I believe, and AMD BC250 integrated graphics, 8 gigs of RAM dedicated to the system, and 8 gigs dedicated to the graphics card, which you can change by flashing. AMD Radeon SI, Mesa 25.2.1. It all seems very quick, it all seems very speedy. Okay, are we making any progress on this actually launching Steam yet? But I really want to give 3D Mark a go. I really want to see if we can put this through 3D Mark and see if it's stable, because it's all here and working, and at least it'll give us an easier way of trying to see what specifications we've actually got, so we can see how powerful that processor is and how powerful that graphics card is as well. Because if they are in any way remotely equivalent to a current generation console, how do we top this? Who knows? Just doing a little bit of digging around just to make sure we do actually have working Vulkan. I've even seen little bits in here saying that ray tracing is supported. Yeah, the moment we get Steam running on here, we're we're good. We're ready to go. We're just going to try and prop this up a little bit, just so we can keep it actually vertical as a system. At least the system is vertical. Oddly enough, quite appropriately propped up using Chinese guitar oil. And we'll go ahead and get this downloaded. It's quite an innovative idea, taking the PlayStation 5s that I'm assuming weren't good enough, cutting off the bits that didn't work, shipping it on a board that looks like it go in a server, and you've essentially got an all-in-one computer, admittedly without any ideal cooling. To be fair, you can see that ideally we should be cooling it this way round with the airflow going that way, but now for some reason 3D Mark does only want to open as the demo, but it did at least recognise that I had some DLCs installed, so we can actually start Time Spy. But it does recognise that we've got Radeon graphics running on the RAD-V drivers. It doesn't know what graphics card it is, because of course this is a weird PlayStation type equivalent thing that we will find out the specifications of. Right, we're finally into the 3D Mark demo. Bit of an interesting one to see how it does here from the get-go. It's very rare we actually run 3D Mark. Usually we just jump straight into Half-Life 2 on Linux testing, but let's just hope it doesn't crash. Okay, did it crash? It did something. No, it's not happy. But this could be a mixture of Linux compatibility issues and the compatibility of this abomination right here. And lo and behold, it has managed to do absolutely nothing. But maybe we'll have to download something else and try that instead. Yeah, it did the same thing. Okay, let's just try Half-Life 2 real quick. Well, we've got the classic white box, but we've seen that plenty of times. That's just a Linux thing. That goes away. That's not a problem. I think 3D Mark's just having Proton problems. I'll go back to it later after I download a couple more versions. Just kind of see what performance we get. 3D Mark wasn't any success, but we will try again. 290 FPS. Okay, it's running very good. I mean, we're running at 70 degrees at the moment. I'm not seeing any rendering issues. In fact, it actually looks... Oh, no, there are rendering issues. Being a bit weird, isn't it? So we got some proof of concept at the moment. So it's worth noting here that no matter what I tried to do, I just couldn't get 3D Mark to work. And I did do a little bit of googling online to see what was happening on forums and things like that, and it does still seem that 3D Mark does have some rather notable problems with different versions of Linux. Now, some people have been rather successful getting these versions to work, and there are some workarounds that involve tweaking with the files that the game is calling on in its compat data, so I went through and did all that and enabled everything that was needed there, such as entering in the serial key and different things like that. I did also try different versions of Proton, but they'd just give me varying kinds of crashes and never actually allow me to make it into the benchmark. So unfortunately, when it comes to 3D Mark, I'm more than open to suggestions if anyone has any issues in the comments they've managed to resolve, but unfortunately today I simply couldn't get it working here. It's still not the end of the world, and it was nice to at least try and get something working, but it meant that we'd have to find something else if we wanted to test the real graphical acceleration of the BC250. The good news is, I was quite easily able to go back to our original test, which we usually try on Linux just to make sure we've got graphical acceleration of some kind, with Half-Life 2. And it turns out it does work absolutely fine on this system, and the issues we're seeing before when I was going over things live, because trust me, I had so much footage talking through the diagnosis of problems, fixes I was trying, all these little things for 3D Mark and Half-Life, and it just isn't worth including because ultimately what the solution was choosing a different version of Proton. See, by default on Linux, Half-Life 2 wants to run with its native Linux port, which it's not too bad, and depending on the hardware you're running, it can be pretty good. But the thing is, when we're running such up-to-date hardware, especially with AMD hardware at its core, Proton tends to work fantastically as long as the game is supported. So it meant that we were able to go through and ensure that Half-Life 2 was working with no problems. And it also let us test the system now it had a little bit of stress on it. As we were running things with ultra settings, the CPU wasn't really having to do much. We've got 6 Zen 2 cores there, so it really wasn't struggling, but the graphics side was at least churning out some heat and actually ensuring that we were able to run things on the BC250. So we had our proof of concept all running. 3D Mark wasn't going to run, but at least we could now verify that actual games and programs would run okay. So just what are the specifications of this weird ASRock AMD partnership BC250? Well, it does seem to be very much what it is on paper, exactly what I've ordered. It is the PlayStation 5, cut down and then re-released on a mining board designed for cryptocurrencies. Of course, at this point there is much better hardware to use, and although it has good specifications, I'm assuming it's just not power efficient enough to work out and to be profitable to use it for mining anymore, so now you can just find these flooding the markets, provided you are willing to order one from China. Processor-wise, it is using a Zen 2 based processor, which is an exactly cut-down version of the PlayStation 5 APU. It boasts 6 cores and 12 threads at 3.5 GHz, which is the maximum clock speed it works with out of the box. Of course, this is very much around the similar maximum boost clocks of the PlayStation 5, but we'll be getting into that comparison later. The graphics card is a custom RDNA 2 based chip, and we will get some more of a deep dive into that in a minute, but for what you need to know, it is pretty much just a cut down version of what is in the PlayStation 5, and doesn't specifically line up exactly with any of AMD's current lineup. The closest card they actually have to it is around the 6500 XT to 6600 XT, leaning towards more the higher end of those two. So it is a purely custom developed graphics chip, but utilizing an architecture that you can buy in AMD's 6000 series of graphics cards. The weird part here though is there's no DDR RAM, it is all GDDR based RAM like the PlayStation 5 console itself, with 16GB GDDR6, which by default gives you 8GB system RAM and 8GB VRAM, so that's pretty much what there is to it. We will eventually try in the future if people want to try and run Windows on it, but as it stands today we're going to be running the Bazzite version of Linux, although to be fair, after using it around for the amount of time I spent on this video, I do think there are probably other distros of Linux that would work better. Other than this, the system does support ray tracing and cost me around £96 today, which is about the average price these go for. Now, when we've done these types of videos before, like when we discovered the Xbox One's graphics card and got the closest thing to it, when it comes to the PlayStation 5, well, this is as close as we can really get to the system. I've tried to make a graph to try and compare a few statistics to try and show you how this APU system differs to the console itself, and you'll have to forgive me because it is really a terrible graph here. As you can see in terms of CPU cores, we have 6 here compared to the 8 on the actual PlayStation 5 itself. The CPU clocks across both units are pretty much the exact same, although from the research I could find on the PlayStation 5 is these are its maximum boost clocks, where these are just the clocks that the BC250 will run out of the box. The most cut down part of the system is the GPU, where we only have 24 compute units compared to the full 36 of the PlayStation 5. And then when it comes to system RAM, well, it's across the same on both the console and the mining board. Of course, this information is very surface level, but then I did want to do a little bit of a deeper look into how the graphics side compares with the PlayStation 5 and the information I can get on things out there. In terms of compute units, as we already know, it's 24 against 36, but interestingly, TMUs see itself cut down quite dramatically from 144 to 96, ROPs from 64 to 32, and in terms of ray tracing accelerators, we are seeing around 12 less than what we see on the actual PlayStation 5 itself. Now, it's difficult to verify this information given how custom of a design the PlayStation 5 is, but I'd imagine the ray trace accelerators pretty much line up with the compute units, given that seems to be how AMD performed things for ray tracing on this generation of cards. The teraflop reading I've included in there, but honestly, as most of us probably already know at this point, teraflops pretty much mean absolutely nothing when it comes to real-world performance. But for £96, it does come pretty close to being a PlayStation 5, at least on paper, one that we can see is clearly cut down in certain places. For the sake of testing today, I have tried to do as much as I possibly can, but you've got to remember this is a very odd bit of hardware, and really I'd have to spend more than the week I've spent with it tinkering around with it, because I have been ill recently, so I haven't got to spend as much time as I'd really like with the hardware, but I have tried to dedicate over a full week into trying to get this thing stable and ready for testing. So everything is running natively on the system itself, there's nothing going on with trying to load NTFS files and games like that. I have taken the time to convert all of the games onto the file system that this is running with Bazzite, so all games are running from the SSD that is installed on the system. So everything should be all set up and working for us now. And just to verify this, after I did transfer over all the files, I did launch GTA 5 for a quick test just to make sure everything was working, and I'm going to insert that clip in now. So it has taken a full day to get to this point, but we are now in-game with GTA 5, the Enhanced Edition, and in terms of settings it's defaulted to, it's a mixture of high and ultra. No ray tracing enabled, but it is pretty up there in terms of settings in 1440p. And just how is it running? Well, perfectly. This is astonishingly good. So yeah, it kind of makes sense. This is more or less the PlayStation 5, at least in terms of the graphics side of things. It is a little bit cut down and a little bit wonky in places, and temperatures are a little bit high, around 80 to 90 degrees, but then again, this is not exactly a recommended setup. Anywhere from 55 to 60 FPS, and it's just running absolutely perfect, which is astonishing because for £96, you've got yourself a computer that can max out one of the most popular games out there with no issues. I mean, yes, thermals are slightly a problem, but then again, this is a janky setup. You could do far better than this. So, with all of this now set up and working, we are ready to actually carry on with the bulk of the video now. It's just been a little while getting it up to this point. But we'll set up all the capture card bits and try and get some capture card bits done. But before that though, can it handle any ray tracing? We've not yet tried to enable ray tracing yet, so I'm just going to whack it on ultra settings for ray tracing. So ray trace shadows, ray trace reflections, ray trace global illumination, ray traced AO. It's getting around 25 to 30 FPS in 1440p. That's actually still quite impressive that it's handling ray tracing. I mean, it is asking it to do an awful lot with these ray tracing settings all turned on high, and the game pretty much running at ultra, so you could definitely tweak this down to be ray tracing capable. I just can't believe this actually works. This is astonishingly good performance. So we'll get this all set up, and then we're ready to start. The benchmarks are coming soon. So we've established a few things. I was able to take this thing out of the box, plug it in, install Linux, and get it set up for gaming in virtually no time at all. Now, I've tried to do the best use case scenario I can for this thing. I've experimented around with different versions of Vulkan and Proton and different things like that to try and get the most stable experience on this set of hardware that we possibly can. Now, there are of course the usual quirks with Linux and Proton, and just gaming on Linux in general, that are combined with running it all through a rather odd set of hardware. So I've done the best job I can, and it's time to find out, is this, the cut down PlayStation 5 APU in the AMD BC250, this weird abomination of a setup, actually one of the best things you can buy for gaming in the benchmarks? Now, starting off the benchmarks, we are running GTA 5 Enhanced Edition with very high settings and high ray tracing turned on. Now, some of you are probably wondering why you're running this game with ray tracing. Don't worry, there is a test coming up after this with it disabled. I really just wanted to find out, could £96 worth of APU or SoC or whatever this is actually handle ray tracing? And it turns out that yes, it can. Now, the frame rate did struggle with the settings we were running at, so you'd probably be better turning a few of these down, but out of curiosity, you can just about get a playable experience on this hardware playing GTA 5 Enhanced Edition with the ray tracing turned up to high settings. However, you are probably just better off disabling this and going back to HBAO, increasing the resolution to 1440p, and enjoying the game at over double the frame rate. It's impressive to say that even if we tested a graphics card that was churning out these frames, we'd say, oh, that's pretty good. But here we have an entire system that is entirely on its own board, churning out 65 FPS on average, with remarkably good frame times down to 55 frames per second, all in a 1440p resolution. And it was running absolutely fine. So GTA 5 Enhanced Edition, ray tracing on or ray tracing off, you're going to be able to make it playable on what is a cut down PlayStation 5. Which makes sense, to be honest, because I'm fairly sure this version started life on the PlayStation 5. Given the inherent popularity of the legacy version of GTA 5, which is still one of the more frequently played versions on Steam, we gave it a test with ultra settings, including all of the advanced options turned on, with AMD CHS shadows in the 1440p resolution. Now, these are the types of settings we usually reserve for almost flagship tier cards, and here we were seeing it run pretty much spot on where we expected it to. Now, it saw very similar frame rates to that of the standard Enhanced Edition we just tested, seeing slightly lower
averages but slightly better frame times. Not that either version was particularly bad to play, in fact both of these were excellent. So depending on the version of GTA 5 you prefer, whether it's the Enhanced Edition or the Legacy version, both of them are capable of running at over 60 FPS, just it's only when you're going to be looking into the more intensive ray tracing side of the Enhanced Edition you'll be seeing that frame rate cut in half. It's a shame we couldn't test GTA Online because of course BattleEye is required, and I've just not figured out a way of making it work on my Linux setups yet. If anyone does know a way of actually making it work, please do tell me, because I'm getting a bit more involved with the Linux side of things, as you can probably tell, and there's still a few things that I'm a little bit out of date on, but still, GTA 5 Legacy version ran perfectly fine. Next up we have Counter-Strike 2. As I'd imagine from a value prospect, this thing being able to play Counter-Strike 2 somewhat competitively means that most people all over the world that may struggle to get PC parts can achieve a rather good experience, even though this hardware is limited to Linux, which as we know does have a few problems with running Counter-Strike 2 reliably, and we'll get into that in just a second. As it stands for our standard built-in benchmark, we saw 134 FPS on average, with 1% lows down to 97 FPS using the competitive settings in 1440p. This wouldn't change even if we drop down to 1080p, which leads me to believe there is definitely something funky going on with Proton and the CPU side of things. Given its reputation on Linux though, this also wouldn't surprise me. Now, I did go through and test a little bit in-game, and I can confirm there is definitely something funky going on CPU-wise. Even when you change to different versions of Proton, I just couldn't get it to resolve the frame rates I was seeing here. See, if you join an online game that is dealing with everything online, you'd see very similar frame rates to what we're seeing here, as most of that is offloaded to Valve servers. However, if you went into an offline game, the CPU load did increase dramatically, although the utilization wasn't very consistent, and you'd see the game drop to around 50 to 60 FPS in what seems like a CPU bottleneck situation. So the system was fine for playing Counter-Strike, just offline play really wasn't recommended here, especially in more intensive maps such as Nuke. Now this was one I had to see. Given the reputation Cyberpunk 2077 has over on consoles, just the idea of running it on the same set of hardware, now that we've seen it progress and get fixed on both PC and consoles, I was just thinking, is this a good set of hardware to be able to play Cyberpunk 2077 on? So utilising a mixture of medium and high settings in 1080p, we saw 42 FPS on average and 1% lows down to 36 FPS during the built-in benchmark. And some of you are probably thinking, but we know the built-in benchmark isn't particularly accurate. But it turns out for more modern sets of hardware, it does tend to actually return figures that are quite reminiscent of actual gameplay. Either that or there's some funky stuff going on Linux that makes them more in parity than they are over on Windows. But still, the frame rate we saw through the built-in benchmark was pretty much the exact same as we saw in gameplay, unless we were building up a ton of havoc. The lowest frame rate I was able to achieve on this set of hardware was just causing tons of explosions, tons of NPCs, tons of problems, and we managed to get down to about 23 to 24 FPS for a brief second before it bounced back up to our normal average. So Cyberpunk 2077 looks and runs great on this set of hardware, which I really wasn't expecting. Now here you're going to be seeing Oblivion Remastered, and this was the footage just as we got in-game. And then we have some more footage of after we just got in-game, and some more footage once again of after we just got in-game. Now, with the way that a lot of modern games out there are utilising Unreal Engine 5, as we've seen before from my previous testing of trying to scale it down, these games are not just VRAM intensive, they are RAM intensive. And given the inherent instability that can occur using GDDR6 as system memory, especially on a system like this that out of the box has a 50-50 split unless you're running custom firmware, well, I didn't initially clock on that it was the RAM causing us problems and causing the system to lock up. I thought maybe it was thermals, so I added another fan, but thermals really weren't the problem here whatsoever. See, Oblivion Remastered is the calling card pretty much for me to wake up and realise that system instability on this is very much due to RAM usage. So once Oblivion had loaded a few things in and we got moving, the game was just unstable and would crash. So unfortunately when it comes to Oblivion, well, there was no way to get it running unless we start messing around with custom firmware. In other more pleasant news though, Hitman 3 launched right up actually loading the built-in benchmark. I have no idea what's happening with my Windows setups, but for some reason the benchmark seems broken there and we have to go in-game, when these benchmarks are really solid tests. But here we were able to run the game with high settings and the best simulation options enabled in a 1080p resolution using the Nude Dartmoor benchmark, which is the more intensive of the two. We saw 47 FPS on average, with 1% lows down to 38 FPS. Now there were definitely portions of this benchmark that were very intensive with lots of particle effects going on and lots of things bringing down our frame rate, but they were never enough to stop it being playable. So Hitman 3 ran perfectly fine and is a good example of how even a modern game will work perfectly on this set of hardware, provided you aren't running into the RAM limitations that can occur in some titles that are a little bit unoptimized or intensive. For example, before I tested this, we were going to test BeamNG, and you can imagine how that went. Mount & Blade Bannerlord is probably one of the best experiences we've had with the game in recent times, with the game immediately launching up to very high settings in 1080p, and as we've already discovered multiple times already, this game sort of knows what settings it wants to run at, and apparently even when you're running with obscure hardware such as this, the game just knows what settings and resolution it wants to run at, as with very high settings in 1080p and a few options even enabled on Ultra, we were seeing the game running with 79 FPS on average and 1% lows down to 53 FPS. Once again, given how reminiscent this benchmark is of the late game, I can very much tell you that Mount & Blade Bannerlord is not going to be a problem if this is what you're gaming on. It's also one of the games that doesn't seem to have any problems whatsoever running on Linux. So there we go, Mount & Blade Bannerlord is not only a perfect example of a game that runs well, but it's a game that runs well even on the strangest hardware imaginable. Next up, we have a choice of benchmark by one of our Atanium tier members, which is Laney. So thank you very much, Laney, for being an Atanium member. And this is the second time we're benchmarking this game, so now I'm actually getting a bit more of an understanding over how I'd like to benchmark this title. And exactly what did we see in terms of performance? Well, one, this game runs absolutely excellent on Linux, and it also runs absolutely excellent on this set of hardware. Now, the performance did see a dramatic increase, changing the renderer built in from DirectX 11 to DirectX 12, and I'm assuming that's because the calls, they just work better when they're then converted over to Vulkan. So, changing this game to DirectX 12 seems to be a must over on Linux, purely because of how well it translates into Vulkan afterwards. So, just a bit of nonsense there, but well worth keeping in mind. We ran the game with Ultra settings and the experimental options enabled in the 1080p resolution with 113 FPS on average and 1% lows down to 95 FPS. It's also worth noting that this was entirely done during intensive sections and also a little bit of downtime, so this is pretty much reminiscent of how the game will run no matter what situation you're in. And finally, unfortunately I can't install Crysis on this system, so we're going for an equally messed up benchmark in its own right, with Fallout 4, which for once actually let us run the game with Ultra settings in 1440p, and didn't enable a completely hard-cut 30 FPS lock. That's a round of achievement there, Bethesda. This game it runs better on Linux. I mean, it still runs terribly, but at least we weren't seeing a 30 FPS cap like we're so used to over on the Windows side. But still, Ultra settings 1440p in one of the most intensive sections of the game returned us 43 FPS on average and 1% lows down to 38 FPS. Now it's worth noting in smaller and lighter situations this would return a pretty much locked 60 FPS experience, but that isn't how we benchmark? That's not how we benchmark the game, we benchmark it through this intensive section just to get an idea how the game performs. So Fallout 4 works, and does work surprisingly well on this strange set of hardware, which is about standard for Fallout because it always loves running the best on the jankiest setups imaginable. Now, overall performance where we could get games running, well, for £96 for a complete setup, you've got to remember, all you've got to add to this is a couple of fans on top, a little bit of power, probably a CMOS battery if you're importing it from abroad, and you're pretty much good to go. I mean, yeah, you need to add some storage, but that's kind of a given with any computer. And the performance out of the box is absolutely brilliant. I can't fault the performance. For £96, you can launch GTA 5 Enhanced Edition, you can play it at ray trace settings with very high at 30 FPS capped at 1080p, or if you really want to, disable the ray tracing and you can enjoy a 60 FPS experience in high 1440p resolutions with no problems whatsoever. I mean, don't get me wrong, there are definitely problems with this setup because there were a lot of games that we ran into issues with. For example, Oblivion wasn't the only game that we ran into problems where the RAM usage was just causing us a monumental amount of trouble. BeamNG is another good example, and of course there are the problems with anti-cheat that isn't supported on Linux, which is why there's no GTA Online testing, and there was no PUBG testing, and a few other titles that you simply can't get running on Linux, at least not easily. So it definitely has those problems, but in the games that we did get to run on it, the performance is absolutely outstanding. You take Mount & Blade Bannerlord, which is a great modern title, and it just isn't struggling at all. Everything would indicate that the processor is doing far better than the graphics card, but the chip inside that is so strong, it was actually outperforming the processor in instances like that. So yeah, the performance across the benchmarks was fantastic. Just trying to get some games to launch proved to be a monumental nightmare. And that isn't to say it was all smooth sailing. Now, don't me wrong, general usage on the system was absolutely fine, as it should be from a Zen 2 based system, running from an SSD, especially given that we are running Linux, and Bazzite, despite its cut down nature and the fact it's a bit more bloated than some of the other distros out there, is incredibly lightning fast to use on a system like this. This system would be fine even if you ran Windows on it, provided you could get the drivers, because it is a really astonishingly good bit of kit. But being the janky setup it is, there are definitely some issues in there. Now, keeping the system cool, there are custom coolers you can buy that were designed for it, but really what we needed was at least 2 fans on it, and adding a third fan to push airflow through the system did help keep temperatures down. I can't argue with that. If you're going to be running this system, it is power hungry, it is hot. Trying to power it and then keep it cool is going to be a challenge. And another issue, which I'm going to try and probably blame more on Bazzite than I am on the set of hardware, is the issues I had with Wi-Fi. I tried 2 different adapters, and they was just non-stop problems. I used my current Linux knowledge to disable power saving, change settings, reinstall drivers, everything that should just fix the Wi-Fi problems, and it wouldn't work. So I thought, you know what, maybe there's something else we can do. So I ordered a brand new adapter, had it delivered next day, tried that, and we were just constantly seeing limited connection, which would happen almost randomly. And it's not something I've ran into previously on Bazzite before, so it's tricky because there are people reporting Wi-Fi issues on certain distros of Linux with certain adapters still, but then again, in my experience using Wi-Fi, these adapters I've had have been fine with all other distros and Bazzite itself, just not on this hardware. So the amount of issues with Wi-Fi was definitely a problem. That isn't to say the system was bad, but you've also got to remember you are running GDDR6 here. So to achieve more system compatibility, or stability is probably the better term for it, setting up a dedicated swap space in a recommended file format on your SSD, preferably an M2 one, definitely makes the system a lot more stable than it is out of the box, given GDDR and its inherent instability in a desktop environment. It's come a long way from where it used to be, because I remember when people used to try these types of things and it was never this stable, especially not out of the box. But I definitely think some custom firmware wouldn't go amiss to definitely configure that RAM, just the amount of RAM around, because just a bit more system RAM would probably open up a whole world of possibilities of additional gaming you can do that you're going to struggle with when you have a 50-50 split to both VRAM and system RAM. So there we have it, the PlayStation 5's graphics card, its APU, its SoC, whatever you want to call it. Just call it the AMD BC250, whatever this thing really is. You can call it whatever you want. But when it comes to the value proposition, even in the janky out-of-the-box state we've looked at it in today, it's fantastic. I can't argue with it. For under £100, you would be hard-pressed to get any set of hardware that is this good. Now, yes, it does have its caveats. We haven't tested it on Windows yet, and I doubt we're going to be able to make it work with any form of graphical acceleration, but it does seem to me like there's another video on this trying to mess around with it some more, because there's custom firmware out there that lets you change around the RAM allocations, which is a must, and we definitely need to look at that at some point. And then there's also the aspect of what can it really do on Windows, and can we maybe bodge some form of graphical acceleration, even if maybe it has to be over the M2 port, converting that back to PCIe and then changing things around. These are all ideas for a possible future video. What it comes down to today is the PS5 may be a very expensive console, but inside it is a set of hardware that may not be cutting edge, but it is rather competent. And given most games are targeting that type of hardware, well, the fact you can buy a cut-down version for this cheap means that for some people over the world that maybe don't have access easily to certain components, provided they don't mind running Linux, maybe this is the answer to you. So not only have we managed to get some weird answers into what actually is this thing, we've also managed to say, you know what, maybe it's good value. Anyway, I hope you've all enjoyed this weird video. I'm feeling a lot better now, so there should be plenty more videos coming. I've got a big stack of parts that I've ordered just building up at the moment. But there's still plenty coming, and I'll catch you then. So thank you all very much for watching, and good night.